Have you ever been underestimated? Or even worse, completely forgotten about? I was. And what happened next changed everything. I'm about to tell you how a simple oversight, my former company forgetting I still had admin access, led to one of the most satisfying moments of my career. Stay with me, because this story might just teach you why you should never burn bridges or leave your digital backdoors unlocked. Welcome to my channel where I share real-life tech stories that most people never hear about. If you enjoy workplace drama with a side of digital justice, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what's coming next. It all started 3 years ago at Nexus Innovations, a mid-sized tech company in Seattle where I'd worked for nearly 7 years. I had built my career there, climbing from a junior developer to becoming the lead systems administrator. I was responsible for overseeing all the network infrastructure, managing access controls, and ensuring our systems ran smoothly. I knew every server, every password, and every digital nook and cranny of that company. It was more than a job. It was my professional home. Then, everything changed when Merrick Industries acquired us. The first few months after the acquisition were chaotic. New management swept in with grand promises of synergy and streamlined operations. Corporate speak that anyone in tech knows usually translates to layoffs and restructuring. Still, I remained optimistic. My track record was solid, and I had intimate knowledge of systems that would take months for someone new to understand. I remember the day clearly, April the 12th, a rainy Tuesday in Seattle. I was called into a meeting with Darren Phillips, the new director of IT operations from Merrick. The conversation was brief and cold. "We're restructuring the IT department," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We've decided to bring in our own team that's already familiar with Merrick's protocols. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I sat there, stunned. 7 years of dedication dismissed in a 3-minute conversation. No recognition of my contributions, no offer to transition to another role. Just a severance package that felt more like hush money than compensation for years of service. "You'll need to hand over all your credentials and access codes before you leave today," Darren continued, sliding a form across the table. "Standard procedure." I nodded mechanically, signing where indicated and listing the primary admin credentials I used daily. But something inside me hesitated. There was one admin account I'd created years ago as an emergency backup, a ghost in the system with root access to nearly everything. It wasn't tied to my name or regular credentials. It was simply called Sys Recovery, with a complex password I'd memorized. I didn't deliberately omit it from the form. At least that's what I told myself. It was more of a momentary lapse, a detail forgotten in the emotional fog of being unexpectedly terminated. Or perhaps subconsciously, I wasn't ready to sever my last connection to a company I had helped build. As I packed up my desk under the watchful eye of security, I felt the stares of my colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, who now averted their gaze, afraid association with me might somehow mark them for the next round of cuts. Only Melissa from the development team dared to approach me. "This is total BS," she whispered, quickly hugging me. "They have no idea what they're doing. You built half these systems yourself." I smiled weakly. "Thanks, Mel. Keep in touch, okay?" "You know I will. Don't be a stranger." Walking out of those glass doors, for the last time, carrying a box of personal items while security escorted me like a criminal, was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. 7 years reduced to a cardboard box and a bitter taste in my mouth. The next few weeks were a blur of job applications, interviews, and trying to rebuild my professional confidence. I landed a few promising leads, but nothing concrete. The tech market in Seattle was competitive, and although my skills were solid, the sudden termination on my record raised eyebrows. Then, exactly 3 weeks after my dismissal, I received a text from Melissa. "You won't believe what's happening here. Complete disaster. Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a small cafe 2 blocks from the Nexus building. Melissa looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy as she stirred her latte. "They're imploding," she said, leaning forward. "Darren and his team had no idea how complex our infrastructure was. They replaced you with some guy named Trevor, who's completely out of his depth. Critical systems are failing, clients are furious, and no one can figure out how to fix it." I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, concern for my former colleagues, and I'll admit, a small spark of satisfaction. "They didn't just fire you," Melissa continued. "They let go of half the original IT team. Now they're scrambling, trying to piece together how everything works. Trevor keeps saying it would be easier to rebuild from scratch than to understand the spaghetti code left behind." "Spaghetti code?" I echoed, feeling a flush of anger. I documented everything meticulously. There are diagrams, workflows, and inline comments in every system. Melissa nodded. "I know. We all know. But they didn't bother to look before they started making changes. Now they can't even access some of the documentation because they've locked themselves out of parts of the system." That's when it hit me. I still had a way in. The SIS recovery account that I'd forgotten to mention when turning over my credentials. For a moment, I considered telling Melissa, offering to help fix the mess remotely. But something held me back. "That's unfortunate," I said carefully. "But it's not your problem to solve, Mel. Don't let them burn you out trying to fix their mistakes." She sighed. "I know. I'm actually interviewing elsewhere next week. I just wanted you to know you were right all along about how the systems were set up. They should have kept you." After our coffee, I returned to my apartment and sat at my computer for a long time, just thinking. I hadn't accessed the SIS recovery account since leaving. I hadn't even been tempted, but now, knowing the chaos unfolding, my fingers itched to log in and see the damage for myself. I told myself it would be just a quick peek, professional curiosity, nothing more. I opened a secure VPN connection and entered the credentials for the SIS recovery account. To my surprise, it worked immediately. They hadn't done a thorough audit of admin accounts. What I saw confirmed everything Melissa had told me. Error logs everywhere. Failed patch attempts. Botched configuration changes. They had taken a finely tuned machine and essentially started removing parts at random, hoping to understand how it worked. I logged out without changing anything, feeling a strange mix of vindication and concern. I hadn't built those systems overnight. It had taken years of careful architecture and refinement. Seeing them mishandled was like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a sculpture. 2 more weeks passed. I had a promising interview with a financial tech startup and was feeling cautiously optimistic about my prospects. Then Melissa called me directly, which was unusual. We typically texted. "They're looking for you," she said, without preamble, her voice tense. "What? Who is?" "Darren and the executive team. They've realized they can't fix the systems without help from someone who knows the architecture intimately. They're trying to locate you to offer a consulting contract." I sat down, processing this information. "Have they contacted me yet?" "Not yet. They're still debating terms. Darren is pushing back, says hiring you back would be admitting he made a mistake. But the CEO is getting pressure from major clients threatening to leave." After hanging up, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to reject any offer outright, let them suffer the consequences of their decision. Another part saw an opportunity to return on my terms, with leverage I hadn't had before. But before I could decide how to respond, something happened that changed everything. The next evening, I noticed unusual activity when I checked the SIS recovery account. Someone was attempting to modify core accesses protocols, the very foundation of the system's security architecture. If implemented incorrectly, it could expose sensitive client data and potentially violate numerous compliance regulations. I watched in real time as Trevor, I assumed it was him from the user trail, made increasingly dangerous changes. He was attempting to reset the entire authentication framework without understanding its integration with other systems. That's when I made a decision that would have significant consequences. Instead of remaining a passive observer, I created a sandbox environment where his changes would appear to take effect, but wouldn't actually impact the production systems. Then I implemented a subtle script that would gradually restore the proper configurations while making it appear as though his solutions were working. It was ethically questionable. I knew that. I was accessing a system without authorization and manipulating it. But I also couldn't stand by and watch as years of work were destroyed and client data potentially compromised. Over the next few days, I continued my covert corrections, always careful to make it seem as though the systems were naturally stabilizing in response to Trevor's attempts. I didn't do it for recognition. In fact, I was actively hiding my involvement. I did it because I cared about what I had built. Then came the email I'd been half expecting, from Darren Phillips himself, with the subject line, "Urgent. Consulting opportunity." The message was carefully worded, describing unexpected challenges in system integration and offering a short-term consulting arrangement to facilitate knowledge transfer. The tone was professional but desperate. They needed me, and they knew it. I didn't respond immediately. I let 3 days pass, 3 days during which I continued my invisible work, stabilizing their systems. When I finally replied, my message was brief. I'm available for a meeting to discuss terms. However, I should inform you that my consulting rate is $300 per hour, with a minimum commitment of 80 hours. It was triple my former salary equivalent, and I fully expected them to balk. Instead, I received a response within an hour. Terms acceptable. Can you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Walking back into the Nexus building the next morning felt surreal. The security guard who had escorted me out just over a month ago now nodded respectfully as I signed in as a consultant. The receptionist, who had averted her eyes during my departure, now smiled warmly. "They're waiting for you in the executive conference room," she said. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, taking the visitor badge she offered. The executive conference room held 4 people. Darren Phillips, looking significantly more stressed than when he'd fired me. The CEO, Michael Bennett, the new CTO from Merrick, and to my surprise, Melissa. "Thank you for coming in," Michael began, gesturing to an empty chair. "We've been experiencing some challenges with our systems integration, and we believe you could provide valuable insight." I nodded, but remained silent, waiting. Darren cleared his throat. "After the acquisition, we attempted to align the Nexus infrastructure with Merrick's standard protocols. We've encountered unexpected complications that have impacted system performance." "What Darren means," Melissa interjected, "is that they broke everything trying to force it into their mold, and now they need someone who actually understands the architecture to fix it." The tension in the room was palpable. Michael shot Melissa a look that was part annoyance, part acknowledgement of the truth in her words. "Essentially, yes," he admitted. "We underestimated the complexity of your systems and the institutional knowledge required to maintain them. We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract to help us stabilize the environment and properly document the architecture for future maintenance." I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I was savoring the moment. I'd be happy to help. However, before we proceed, I should clarify something. I opened my laptop and connected to their network using the guest credentials they'd provided. Then, with a few keystrokes, I accessed a dashboard I had created years ago that provided a high-level overview of system health. You'll notice that many of the critical issues have already begun resolving themselves over the past week, I said, turning the screen toward them. The authentication framework is stabilizing, the database integration points are functioning correctly again, and the customer data pipeline has returned to normal throughput. Confusion crossed Darren's face. Yes, Trevor has been making progress on those fronts. It's the remaining issues we need help with. I smiled slightly. Trevor hasn't fixed anything. I have. The room fell silent as my words sank in. What exactly are you saying? The CTO asked, leaning forward. I'm saying that I still had admin access to your systems, access that was overlooked during my departure. When I became aware of the critical issues threatening client data, I took steps to mitigate them remotely. Darren's face drained of color. You accessed our systems without authorization? That's a violation of... Before you go down that road, I interrupted calmly. Consider that I prevented multiple compliance violations that could have resulted in significant fines and client litigation. I didn't extract or damage any data. I simply prevented your team from causing irreparable harm to systems I spent years building. Michael held up a hand to silence Darren. Let me make sure I understand. You've been fixing our systems remotely, without our knowledge, for the past week. Yes, I answered honestly. Initially, I accessed the system out of curiosity, after hearing about the issues from former colleagues. When I saw the potential for serious data compromise, I created a containment strategy and implemented corrections. The CTO looked impressed despite himself. And you did this why exactly? Revenge. Leverage. I shook my head. Professional pride. I built those systems. I couldn't stand by and watch them be dismantled through ignorance. Michael exchanged glances with the CTO, then nodded slowly. I appreciate your candor, and while there are certainly questions about the ethics of unauthorized access, I can't argue with the results. He turned to Darren. This is exactly why I questioned the decision to eliminate his position so abruptly. The meeting shifted then, from accusatory to collaborative. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the current state of the systems, the changes attempted by Merrick's team, and my recommendations for moving forward. I was honest about the challenges they faced and the time it would take to properly integrate the two companies' technologies. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a 3-month consulting agreement at my requested rate, with clearly defined deliverables and expectations. I would work primarily remotely, coming in only for key meetings and knowledge transfer sessions. As we concluded, Michael asked everyone else to leave the room, keeping only me behind. I owe you an apology, he said once we were alone. The decision to terminate your position was presented to me as a straightforward consolidation of redundant roles. I didn't question it sufficiently, and that was a mistake. I appreciated his honesty. Thank you for saying that. I'm curious about something, he continued. You had access all this time. You could have done significant damage if you'd wanted revenge. Why help instead? I considered the question carefully, because that's not who I am. And because I believe in the company I helped build, even if it didn't believe in me. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Well, I'm grateful for your integrity, and I hope this consulting arrangement might evolve into something more permanent if you're open to that possibility. I smiled but made no commitments. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I wanted, long term. The startup I'd interviewed with had made an attractive offer, and this experience had taught me valuable lessons about corporate loyalty and self-worth. As I left the building that day, Melissa caught up with me in the lobby. "You magnificent bastard," she said with a grin. "You let them dig themselves into a hole and then charge them triple to pull them out." I laughed. It wasn't quite that calculated. "Sure it wasn't," she replied skeptically. "Anyway, just so you know, Half the development team is talking about following you wherever you go next. Word's gotten around about how they treated you and how you still saved their asses. That was 3 years ago. I did complete the consulting contract, extending it twice as the scope of work expanded. The systems were eventually stabilized, properly documented, and successfully integrated with Merrick's infrastructure. On my terms, respecting the architecture I had designed. I didn't return to Nexus permanently. Instead, I accepted the position with the financial tech startup, where I'm now the Director of Infrastructure. Melissa joined me 6 months later, along with 2 other talented developers from Nexus. Darren Phillips was quietly reassigned to a non-technical role at Merrick shortly after our first meeting. I heard through the grapevine that the fallout from the system's integration failure had significantly damaged his standing in the company. As for the SIS recovery account, I properly documented and transferred it during my consulting period, but the experience taught me a valuable lesson about institutional knowledge and the true value of the people who build and maintain complex systems. Sometimes, the person you underestimate today is exactly the person you'll desperately need tomorrow. And sometimes, when they forget you still have admin access, it becomes the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly why they should never have let you go in the first place. If you've enjoyed this story of digital redemption, hit that subscribe button for more tech insider stories from the trenches. I've got plenty more where this came from, and trust me, the corporate tech world is full of drama you wouldn't believe. Leave a comment below sharing your own workplace revenge story, and I'll see you in the next video.